Life, at least the life I thought I was living, had been perfect. My wife, Emma, and I had built something beautiful over the years. We met when we were both in our 20s. She was everything I could have asked for: intelligent, kind, funny, and, of course, stunningly beautiful. Our wedding was a dream, and our early years together had been filled with passion, ambition, and mutual respect. Then, of course, came the baby. A perfect little boy, our miracle. After his birth, we seemed to settle into a comfortable rhythm. We were a family. I was a proud husband and father, and everything appeared to be as it should be, but life, as I would soon learn, is fragile, and nothing is ever as it seems. There were subtle signs in the months leading up to the discovery, tiny details that I dismissed as normal stress in our lives. Emma had started spending more time away from home, sometimes working late into the night. At first, I was understanding, even proud of her ambition. But then I noticed things that didn't quite add up. She became distant. She was less affectionate, less present. Conversations that used to flow easily between us began to feel forced. It was a Wednesday evening when I first had that gnawing feeling. I had come home after a long day at work, eager to see her, to feel like a family again. But when I entered the living room, Emma was on her phone, engrossed in something. She didn't even look up. I asked her how her day was, and she mumbled something I couldn't quite hear. "Emma, is everything okay?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't respond immediately, just scrolled through her phone. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes a bit too wide. "Yeah. Everything's fine," she replied, but the words felt hollow. There was something in her tone, something foreign that I knew she was hiding something, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The next day, I decided to snoop. I didn't want to, but something in me told me I had to know. I waited until she left the house for errands, then took her phone from the kitchen counter. I told myself I wasn't a man who invaded his wife's privacy, but the voice in my head was louder than any moral objection. I unlocked her phone, and at first, everything seemed fine: texts to friends, work emails, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, a message popped up that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was from a number I didn't recognize, and it read, "I can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you." My heart pounded. My fingers trembled as I opened the message. It wasn't just a random conversation, it was part of an ongoing exchange. The words were intimate, flirtatious, and suggestive. I scrolled further and found more messages, more from this man, these intimate exchanges that cut deep into my chest like a knife. The final blow came when I found a picture. She didn't know I had unlocked the phone, but I had. The image was of her, smiling at a dinner table, with a man I didn't recognize, his hand on her waist. It was over. The world I had built for myself, my ideal life, had been shattered. My wife, the mother of my child, the woman I had trusted with everything I had betrayed me. And worse, it was a betrayal that I wasn't prepared for. The man in the picture, the man she had been seeing, wasn't just some fling. No, this wasn't a one-night mistake. This had been going on for months. I dropped the phone on the table, my head spinning. The room seemed to close in on me. I felt like I was suffocating, drowning in betrayal. How could she do this? How could she lie to me for so long, pretending everything was fine while she was living this double life? My heart raced. My hands were cold. I didn't know what to do next. I wanted to confront her right away, but I also wanted to understand more. I needed to understand why she had done this, why I had been so blind. I waited. When Emma returned, her usual warmth and cheerfulness felt like a mask. She didn't notice my anger, the quiet rage bubbling inside of me. I asked her to sit down with me in the living room, my voice barely a whisper. "Emma, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up from her phone, sensing the gravity in my tone. She sat down slowly, a cautious smile on her lips. "What's wrong, babe?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Who's redacted?" Her smile faltered. I could see the fear in her eyes, but she tried to play it off. "What are you talking about?" I slid the phone across the table toward her, and I watched as her face drained of color. Her eyes flicked down to the messages. She froze, not knowing what to say. "Explain it to me, Emma." "Tell me I'm wrong," I demanded, my voice low and shaking. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, her lips trembled. Her voice came out soft, almost inaudible. "I never meant for it to happen. It just did." I couldn't breathe. The weight of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just a mistake. This was an affair. This was a choice. A deliberate, conscious choice to betray me. To destroy everything we had. "I don't understand," I said, my voice cracking. "Why? Why would you do this to me? To us? To our son?" Tears filled her eyes, but I couldn't feel sorry for her. "Not now." "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It was a mistake. I love you, but what?" I snapped, standing up and pacing around the room. "What kind of mistake ends in a pregnancy? What kind of mistake has you texting and meeting up with another man for months?" The truth was unbearable. My whole world, everything I had believed to be true, was nothing more than a lie. Emma's guilt-ridden tears only added salt to the wound. I didn't want this to happen. But I've been so unhappy. I thought I could fix things. I thought it was just a phase, but it wasn't. I needed something I wasn't getting from you. I laughed bitterly, the sound bitter and empty. "So, what? You thought cheating was the solution?" Her face twisted with pain, and she looked away. "I never meant for it to go this far. I never planned on getting pregnant. That was it. The bombshell." I sat back down slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "What do you mean, pregnant?" Emma's face crumpled as she let out a shaky breath. "I'm having his baby, not yours." The room spun. I couldn't process the words. I couldn't breathe. Every piece of the puzzle that had been falling into place suddenly made sense. The distance, the secrecy, the late nights. She had been carrying another man's child while I was left in the dark, playing the fool. That I stood up again, this time feeling a cold fury surge through me. "You think you can just say that and I'll forgive you? You think you can just tell me this, after everything, and think I'll understand?" She reached out for me, her hand trembling, but I pulled back. "No. Don't touch me." There was nothing left to say. No more explanations. No more lies. The man I thought I knew, the woman I loved, were both strangers to me now. And this was only the beginning. I couldn't think straight. My mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, each one more painful than the last. My entire life had been built on a lie. The foundation of my marriage, the dreams I had for my family, they were all nothing but smoke and mirrors. It felt like I was drowning in it all, the betrayal, the lies, the sense of utter helplessness. I wasn't just angry, I was broken. I didn't know how to look at Emma the same way. How could I? Every time I tried, my stomach twisted into knots, and my heart ached with a deep, searing pain that I didn't know how to get rid of. She was the woman I had trusted with everything, my love, my loyalty, my life. And now, she had taken that and crushed it beneath her heels. For hours, we sat in silence, neither of us knowing what to say. I didn't want to hear her apologies, and she didn't know how to explain herself. Every time she tried, it sounded like a hollow excuse. A justification. I hated it. I hated the way her voice cracked, the way she desperately searched my eyes for any sign of forgiveness, any glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I would let her off the hook. But there was nothing. There was no coming back from this. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I never meant for it to happen this way." But those words were empty. They couldn't erase what she had done. They couldn't undo the months of deception. The truth was too deep now. I couldn't ignore it, no matter how much she wanted me to. The baby. The realization that the child she carried wasn't mine hit me again, like a slap to the face. That little life growing inside of her, a life that I thought was part of our future, wasn't mine to raise. It wasn't my blood. How could I pretend that everything was okay when I knew the truth? How could I stand by her side and pretend that this was still a family? I stood up abruptly, pacing the living room. My mind was a blur of emotions: grief, anger, frustration. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit something. But mostly, I just wanted to escape. I needed space. I needed to think. My legs carried me out of the room without a word, and I heard Emma's voice call out behind me, "Where are you going? Please, we need to talk about this. We can fix this." Fix it? How could we fix this? I turned around slowly, my fists clenched at my sides. "There's nothing to fix, Emma. You've ruined everything. You've ruined me." Her eyes welled up with tears as she stood up, desperate to close the gap between us. But I didn't move. I couldn't. "Not anymore, please don't leave. Please." She reached for me, but I stepped back, out of her grasp. "No. I'm done. I need time to think, and I need you to stay away from me. I can't look at you right now." I turned away from her again, hearing her sob behind me. But I didn't care. Not then. I was too lost in the storm of emotions raging inside me. As I walked out of the front door and into the night air, the weight of what had happened hung heavy on my chest. That I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get out. I had to be alone. That I walked for hours, not caring where my feet took me. I wandered through the streets of the neighborhood we had once called our home, feeling like a stranger in a place that used to bring me comfort. The familiar houses, the same old streetlights, it was all still there, yet it all felt so foreign now. It was like everything had shifted. And I had no idea how to find my way back. Eventually, I found myself sitting in a park, staring at the moon. My mind wandered back to Emma. I tried to remember what it was like before this all started, before the lies, before the affair. I remembered our first date, the way she laughed at my jokes, how we'd stayed up all night talking about our hopes and dreams. I remembered the day we brought our son home from the hospital, how I swore I'd do anything to protect our little family. I remembered the woman I fell in love with, the woman I thought I knew. But now, I couldn't even recognize her. The pain was overwhelming. It was like a constant ache in my chest that refused to go away. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know how to move forward. I was angry at her, sure. But more than anything, I was angry at myself. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed the signs? And then came the deeper question, the one that had been gnawing at me since the discovery. What now? I didn't want to leave her. Not really. I still loved her, in some twisted, broken way. But could I ever look at her the same way again? Could I ever trust her? How could I raise a child that wasn't mine? How could I stay with a woman who had so easily tossed our life aside for another man? I stayed at the park for hours, lost in my own thoughts, until the first light of dawn began to break through the sky. The world was waking up around me, but I still felt stuck in the darkness. When I finally returned home, Emma was sitting on the couch, her face pale and tired. She didn't look up when I walked in, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. "I need you to leave." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" "I need space, Emma. I need you to leave for a while. I can't be around you right now. I need to figure things out. She looked like I had slapped her. Her face crumpled as if I had just shattered her world. But I couldn't find it in me to feel sorry for her. I can't leave, she whispered, her voice breaking. I can't lose you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, just give me a chance. I shook my head. You've had your chance. And you blew it. I turned and walked away, leaving her there, broken and sobbing. I didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear. I couldn't live in this lie any longer. That I wasn't sure what revenge looked like yet, or how I was going to move forward with my life, but I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't going to be the end of it. There was no turning back now. I had been betrayed. And I was going to make sure she felt the weight of it. It had been a few weeks since I confronted Jake, but the fire inside me hadn't died down. If anything, it had burned brighter, fueled by the humiliation of it all, by the way Emma and Jake had disregarded the life we had built together. They were both still out there, living their lives, while I was left in the ruins of what was supposed to be my future. The pain of the betrayal hadn't lessened, but I had learned to mask it. I had stopped crying. I had stopped questioning my worth. Now, I was focused on one thing: revenge. That I knew I was slipping into dangerous territory. I could feel it, something inside me was shifting. The man I had been, the man who would have never hurt anyone, was fading away. In his place, a version of me I barely recognized was rising. I was angry, bitter, and I wanted nothing more than to watch Emma and Jake suffer for what they had done to me. That I didn't care about the consequences anymore. I didn't care who got hurt. All I wanted was payback. Emma and I still hadn't spoken much. I kept her at arm's length, giving her nothing but silence and cold indifference. She'd stopped crying, but I could tell that the weight of everything was starting to hit her. She wasn't asking for forgiveness anymore. She was just waiting for the storm to pass, hoping that eventually, I would be able to forgive her. But I couldn't. Not yet, and certainly not after what I had learned. That I had been tracking her, watching her more closely than I ever had before. The tiny details that I had once ignored now stood out like neon signs. The way she smiled at her phone when it buzzed. The way she always seemed distracted when I asked her about her day. I wasn't a paranoid man by nature, but after everything that had happened, I couldn't help but look for any more signs of betrayal. And I had found them. One evening, I caught her leaving the house. She didn't even look back, didn't say goodbye. That was odd. Emma had always been the type to give a goodbye kiss, a gesture of affection. But this time, she just walked out, not even acknowledging I was in the room. I watched her through the window as she got into her car, and I followed her. It wasn't the first time I'd followed her, but tonight felt different. There was something about her behavior that told me this wasn't just another trip to the store or a dinner with friends. She was hiding something. That I trailed her for miles, my car staying a safe distance behind. She pulled into a small, dimly lit neighborhood, one I had never seen her visit before. My heart raced as she parked her car and walked down a narrow alley toward a building that looked like it hadn't been used in years. I couldn't stop myself. I parked my car a few blocks away and followed her on foot. My mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. What was she doing? Who was she meeting? My fists clenched, and I had to force myself to keep breathing. I was teetering on the edge, and I knew it. I stayed hidden in the shadows, watching as Emma entered the building. The door clicked shut behind her. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there. Part of me wanted to storm in and demand answers, force her to face me. But another part of me, the darker part of me, told me to wait. Wait for the truth to come to light. I waited for over an hour, my body growing colder as the minutes passed. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the door creaked open, and Emma stepped out. She wasn't alone, Jake was with her. I felt the blood drain from my face, and my fists tightened so hard that my nails dug into my palms. I had seen enough. They were together. They hadn't just been having an affair, they were planning something more. They weren't sorry. They weren't remorseful. This was real. They had been living in their own world, and I was nothing more than a fool. My head was spinning, my thoughts clouded by a mix of rage and betrayal. I could barely breathe as I watched them walk side by side, talking and laughing, as if they hadn't just shattered my entire existence. I followed them at a distance, my legs like lead, barely able to keep up. They eventually parted ways, and Emma drove off. I stayed back, waiting until she was out of sight, before I started the long walk back to my car. I had seen enough. I knew what I needed to do. The next day, I went to work with a heavy heart. My thoughts were elsewhere. I had barely slept the night before, my mind consumed by the images of Emma and Jake together. But it wasn't just the betrayal that stung anymore. It was the realization that I had been living in a lie for so long, a lie that I had never been able to see through. I was angry. So angry, but I was also determined. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I wasn't going to let Emma and Jake continue living their lives like everything was fine, like nothing had happened. It was time to put my plan into motion. I had everything I needed now: information, evidence. But I wasn't going to confront Emma about it, not yet. I was going to hit her where it would hurt the most. Revenge wasn't just about causing pain. It was about making her feel the weight of her choices, making her understand that the life she had destroyed was gone for good. It was about making sure that she would never forget what she had done to me. The first step was going to be the hardest. I had to tell her I knew. I had to look her in the eyes and let her see that I was no longer the man she had married. That I had seen through her lies. That the world she thought she could keep hidden was coming into the light. But there was more to this story than just her. There was Jake. And he was going to pay, too. The day had arrived. I had thought about how this moment would unfold 1,000 times in my mind, each scenario playing out with a different twist. But no matter how I had imagined it, no version of this confrontation had prepared me for the storm that would follow. I had planned it all meticulously. I knew exactly where Emma would be, when she would be there, and what she'd be doing. It was the perfect setup. The house was quiet, the kids at school, and I had already cleared my schedule for the day. I was ready. Ready to face her and confront her with everything. I didn't know what I was expecting from her reaction, but I wasn't sure it would matter. It didn't matter how much she cried or begged for forgiveness. What mattered was that she had broken me, broken our family, and now, I was going to return the favor. When she walked through the door, her eyes were tired, and her face was drawn. She looked like she hadn't been sleeping well. Good. She should feel the weight of her guilt. She barely looked at me as she came in, too consumed by her own thoughts to notice the tension in the room. That was fine. I had no intention of easing her into this. I needed to go straight for the jugular. Emma, I said, my voice cold. As I leaned against the doorframe, she stopped in her tracks, her eyes locking with mine for the first time in days. She took a slow breath, but didn't speak, waiting for me to continue. I know about you and Jake, I said bluntly. I didn't need to sugarcoat it. There was no point. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Her face drained of color, and she stepped back as if I had slapped her. What are you talking about? She asked, but there was a tremor in her voice, a crack in the facade she'd been hiding behind. I know about your affair. I know about everything. I took a step toward her, my heart pounding in my chest. And I know about the baby. It's not mine, Emma. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she just stood there, her eyes wide with shock. The silence between us was deafening, filled with the weight of the truth. I could see the panic rising in her, the realization settling in that this wasn't going to be some easy conversation where we would sweep things under the rug. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, shaking her head in denial. She stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached for mine, but I pulled away. "I've seen the messages, Emma," I said. "I've seen everything. Your lies, your secrets. And I'm done being the fool." Her eyes began to water, her lips trembling as she tried to form words, but nothing came out. She looked so small, so vulnerable in that moment, and for a second, I almost felt the old pull toward her. I almost reached out to comfort her, to take her in my arms like I used to. But then I remembered. I remembered everything she had done, everything she had stolen from me. "You need to leave," I said, my voice harder now. "I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend like we're okay when I know what you've done." She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. "It's over, Emma. I want you to pack your things and leave. I can't even look at you right now." For the first time in weeks, I saw her break. She crumpled in front of me, her sobs shaking her entire body. She fell to her knees, her hands clutching at her chest. "Please, don't do this," she begged. "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to happen this way. I made a mistake. It was a mistake." I stared at her, cold, unfeeling. The woman who had been my world, the woman who had promised me forever, was begging for forgiveness, but it was too late. I had given her too many chances. I had trusted her with everything, and she had destroyed it all. "I don't want your apologies," I said. "Not anymore." I watched her as she collapsed into a heap on the floor, the weight of everything crashing down on her. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by the anger I still carried. The rage that had been festering inside of me for so long. She had no idea what she had done to me, to us. That I took a step back, heading toward the door. "I'll give you time to pack. But don't bother coming back." I left her there on the floor, her cries echoing in my ears as I walked away. That I wasn't done with Jake yet, that I had already made the decision that he would pay for what he had done. I wasn't going to let him go unpunished, not after everything he had taken from me. Not after everything he had done to destroy my life. That I tracked him down easily enough. It wasn't hard. The man was always on social media, always posting about his latest accomplishments and his perfect life. It was like he was daring me to find him, to confront him. I was going to take him down, and I was going to do it in a way that would make him regret ever coming near Emma. It was late when I showed up at his apartment. I had spent the day watching him, waiting for the right moment. When I rang the doorbell, I could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching. The door swung open, and there he stood, looking like he was ready to face a challenger. His eyes narrowed when he saw me standing there. "What do you want?" Jake asked, crossing his arms. That I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I want you to understand something, Jake. You may think you've won, but you haven't. You've ruined my life, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." Jake laughed, a smug, arrogant laugh that made my blood boil. "You're a joke, man. I don't owe you anything." "You'll regret that," I said, my voice low and menacing. "You're not going to walk away from this. Not when I'm through with you." His expression faltered, just for a moment, and I could see the fear behind his eyes. But it was too late for him. I wasn't going to give him a way out. I wasn't going to let him play the victim. "I'm going to make sure you feel what I felt," I said, my fists clenched at my sides. Every last ounce of it. I had thought I could control this. That my pursuit of revenge was nothing more than a means to an end, a way to make Emma and Jake feel the weight of their betrayal. But the more I immersed myself in it, the more I realized that I was no longer the man I had once been. The anger, the bitterness, the desperation for justice, it was all consuming me. When I walked away from Jake's apartment that night, I could feel the tension in my body. The adrenaline was still coursing through me, and I knew that it wasn't over. It wasn't even close. My confrontation with him had been a warning, a first strike in what was going to be a long and painful battle, but even as I reveled in the power of the moment, a small voice in the back of my mind told me that I had crossed a line. That the revenge I was so determined to carry out was going to destroy more than just my enemies, it was going to destroy me, too. I tried to shake that feeling off. I couldn't afford to think about that. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. The days after my confrontation with Emma were quiet, too quiet. I could hear the occasional sob from the bedroom, but I refused to acknowledge it. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. I was determined to make sure she felt every ounce of pain I had gone through. I wouldn't let her off the hook, not after everything she had taken from me. She packed her things and left the house a few days later, but not without one final, tearful plea for forgiveness. She begged me to reconsider, to give her another chance. She promised that she would make things right, that she would do anything to fix the mess we had made of our lives, but I couldn't believe her anymore. Not after everything that I watched her drive away, her face etched with regret, and I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. Part of me expected some kind of relief, some sense of closure, but instead, I felt hollow. The house, once filled with life and laughter, now felt like a tomb. The silence was deafening. It was in those moments of silence that I started to question myself. I had told Emma that it was over, that I could never forgive her, but deep down, I knew that wasn't entirely true. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, not for what she had done to me, to our family, but I still couldn't deny the part of me that wanted to fix things, to try again, but there was no turning back now. My obsession with revenge continued to grow. Every time I saw Jake's face in my mind, every time I remembered the way he had smiled at me while he had been sleeping with my wife, my blood would boil. He hadn't just ruined my marriage, he had ruined my entire life. And now it was my turn to ruin his. I dug deeper into his personal life, tracking his movements, checking his social media, asking around about his whereabouts. I wanted to know everything about him, every weakness, every secret, every way I could use his life against him. I knew that I had to break him, just as he had broken me. I wasn't just going to confront him again, I was going to destroy him. It wasn't long before I found my opening. Jake had been bragging online about a business venture he was working on, a real estate project that had the potential to make him a small fortune. It was his latest big move, and he was eager to share every detail of it with anyone who would listen. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he was on top of the world. That was where I would strike. I began to gather information on the project. I contacted some of the people involved in the deal, made a few phone calls, and learned that there were some shady things going on behind the scenes. The project wasn't as stable as Jake thought it was. There were complications, legal issues, financial discrepancies, and a long list of people who were unhappy with the way things were being handled, and I knew just how to use this to my advantage. I quietly began to leak information. Nothing too obvious at first, just enough to raise suspicion. A phone call here, a message there, making sure that the right people knew about the problems that Jake's project was facing. It wasn't long before rumors started to spread. The investors began pulling out, the contractors started demanding more money, and the project that Jake had been so proud of began to crumble before his eyes. I watched from the sidelines as everything he had worked for started to slip through his fingers. It wasn't enough to just ruin his career, I wanted him to feel the weight of his choices. I wanted him to feel what it was like to lose everything. To realize, too late, that he had gambled everything on a lie. I kept my distance, watching him scramble to salvage what was left of his reputation, his business, his future. He hadn't even begun to understand what was happening to him, but I could feel it, the tension in the air, the sense of inevitability that came with the collapse of everything he had built. And as I watched it unfold, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, but that satisfaction didn't last. I had done what I set out to do, but it didn't feel like I thought it would. I had broken him. I had taken away everything he cared about. But as I watched him struggle, as I saw the anguish in his eyes, something started to shift inside of me. I had thought that revenge would give me peace, that it would bring me closure. But instead, it left me feeling emptier than I had ever felt before. In the quiet moments of the night, when the rush of my actions had passed, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Had I really won? Had I truly made him pay, or had I simply become a version of myself that I couldn't recognize? I didn't have the answers, not yet, but what I did know was that this was far from over. Emma and Jake had shattered my world, and now it was my turn to piece it back together. The revenge had been sweet, but the aftermath was a bitter pill to swallow. The damage had been done, but the question lingered: could I ever truly move on from this, or had I sealed my fate by following this path? The world around me felt suffocating. The house, once filled with the warmth of family and the sound of laughter, now seemed hollow and oppressive. Every room reminded me of the life I had lost, of Emma, of the children, of the life that had been shattered by lies, betrayal, and my own desire for vengeance. For weeks, I had been consumed by the need to make Emma and Jake suffer, to make them feel the depth of the pain they had caused me. But now, as the dust began to settle and the chaos of my actions faded into silence, the reality of what I had done began to sink in: that I had destroyed lives. Not just Emma and Jake's, but my own as well. That I spent most of my days locked away in the empty house, drowning in my thoughts, my regrets, and the constant hum of guilt that gnawed at my insides. The anger that had once fueled my actions was now replaced by an overwhelming sense of emptiness. I had won my revenge, but I had lost everything else, and yet, in the depths of that emptiness, something shifted. That I had spent so much time blaming Emma, blaming Jake, blaming the world for everything that had gone wrong. But the truth was, I had played my part in this. I had allowed myself to be consumed by anger, by the need for retribution, instead of focusing on healing. I had let my obsession with revenge define me, to the point where I no longer recognized the man I had become. It was a hard truth to face. But it was a truth I couldn't ignore any longer. The first step toward healing came when I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of my own guilt. I had always been so focused on making Emma and Jake suffer that I had never stopped to truly reflect on how my actions had affected me. I had pushed my emotions down, buried them under the anger and resentment that had driven me forward. But now, in the quiet of the empty house, I was forced to confront them. I remembered the man I had been before all of this. The man who had loved Emma with everything he had, the man who had believed in the power of family, the man who had trusted the woman he had married. That man was still inside me, buried beneath the rubble of betrayal and revenge, but he was there. It took time, weeks, even months, but eventually, I began to understand that healing wasn't just about punishing those who had wronged me. It was about letting go of the anger, the hate, the bitterness that had taken over my life. I had to forgive, not just Emma and Jake, but myself. The path to forgiveness wasn't easy. It wasn't something I could do overnight. But I had to start somewhere. And that somewhere began with acknowledging the pain I had caused, both to myself and to others. I reached out to the people who had been there for me during the darkest moments of my life. Friends, family, old colleagues, people who had watched me descend into this abyss of anger and vengeance. I knew that in order to truly heal, I needed to surround myself with people who cared about me, who could help me find my way back to who I was. It wasn't about seeking their approval. It was about seeking understanding. I needed to explain what had happened, to share the pain I had been through, and to let go of the shame I had carried with me for so long. It was in these conversations that I began to realize just how much I had hurt others. Not just Emma and Jake, but my friends and family as well. They had watched me destroy myself, and they had been powerless to stop me. They had tried to reach out, to offer support, but I had pushed them all away. I had isolated myself in my pursuit of revenge, and in doing so, I had alienated the people who cared about me the most. As I started to open up, I could see the relief in their eyes. They wanted to help, to support me, but they had no idea how to break through the walls I had built around myself. And as I began to let those walls down, I realized just how much I had been denying myself, denying the love, the compassion, and the healing that I so desperately needed. But as much as I tried to rebuild, there were still moments when the past would come crashing back. I would remember the way Emma's face had looked when she had begged for my forgiveness, the way her tears had mirrored my own. I would remember Jake, standing there smugly, thinking he had won, only to have his entire life come crumbling down around him. I had seen the devastation in his eyes, and while it had felt sweet at the time, it now felt like a burden I couldn't carry. And then there were the moments when I couldn't help but think about Emma, about her absence in my life. I missed her, and I hated myself for it. I had spent so much time resenting her for her betrayal, but the truth was, I still loved her. The love I had for her wasn't something I could simply turn off. It was there, buried beneath the hurt and the anger, but it was still a part of me. In those moments, I would remind myself that it wasn't about getting her back. It wasn't about undoing the past. It was about learning to live with the choices I had made and finding peace within myself. And so, I began to work on letting go. I let go of the need for revenge, the need for validation, the need to punish those who had hurt me. I let go of the idea that I could fix everything, that I could somehow make things right by controlling the outcome. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to call Emma, to reach out and beg her to come back. There were moments when I wanted to confront Jake again, to make him feel the consequences of his actions. But every time that urge arose, I reminded myself of the lessons I had learned. Revenge wouldn't heal me. It wouldn't bring me the peace I craved. The only way forward was through forgiveness, through self-acceptance, and through the painful but necessary process of letting go. The road to redemption wasn't a straight line. It was full of setbacks, doubts, and painful realizations. But with each step I took, I felt a little bit lighter, a little bit closer to the man I used to be, or perhaps, to the man I was always meant to become. I knew it would take time to rebuild my life. I knew it would take time to heal the scars of betrayal and to repair the relationships I had destroyed. But I was ready to face that challenge. I was ready to rebuild, not just my life, but my sense of self. It wasn't going to be easy. But it was the only way forward.